He was also dimly aware of an ominous muttering all around the walls. Then he felt a tugging on the back of his robes. "Come on," said Ron's voice in his ear. "Move, come on." Ron steered him out of the hall, Hermione hurrying alongside them. As they went through the doors, the people on either side drew away as though they were frightened of catching something. Harry didn't have a clue what was going on, and neither Ron nor Hermione explained anything until they had dragged him all the way up to the empty Gryffindor common room. Then Ron pushed Harry into an armchair and said, "You're a Parselmouth? Why didn't you tell us?" "I'm a what?" said Harry. "A Parselmouth," said Ron. "You can talk to snakes." "I know," said Harry. "I mean, that's only the second time I've done it. I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin Dudley at the zoo once. Long story, but it was telling me that it had never been to Brazil. I sort of set it free without meaning to. That was before I knew I was a wizard. A boa constrictor told you that he'd never been to Brazil," Ron repeated faintly. "So," said Harry, "I bet loads of people here can do it." "No, they can't," said Ron. "It's not a very common gift, Harry. This is bad." "What's bad?" said Harry, starting to feel quite angry. "What's wrong with everyone? Listen, if I hadn't told that snake not to attack Justin..." "Oh, that's what you said to it." "What do you mean?" "You were there. You heard me." "I heard you speaking Parseltongue," said Ron. "Snake language. You could have been saying anything. No wonder Justin panicked. You sounded like you were egging the snake on or something. It was creepy, you know." Harry gaped at him. "I spoke a different language, but I didn't realize. How can I speak a language without knowing I can speak it?" Ron shook his head. Both he and Hermione were looking as though someone had died. Harry couldn't see what was so terrible. "Do you want to tell me what's wrong with stopping a dirty great snake biting Justin's head off?" he said. "What does it matter how I did it, as long as Justin doesn't have to join the Headless Hunt?" "It matters," said Hermione, speaking at last in a hushed voice, "because being able to talk to snakes was what Salazar Slytherin was famous for. That's why the symbol of Slytherin House is a snake." Harry's mouth fell open. "Exactly," said Ron. "And now the whole school's going to think that you're the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of something. His great-great-great-great-great-grandson of something." "But I'm not," said Harry, with a panic he couldn't quite explain. "You'll find that hard to prove," said Hermione. "He lived about 1,000 years ago. For all we know, you could be." Harry lay awake for hours that night. Through a gap in the hangings round his four-poster, he watched snow starting to drift past the tower window and wondered, could he be a descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He didn't know anything about his father's family, after all. The Dursleys had always forbidden questions about his wizarding relatives. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in Parseltongue. The words wouldn't come. It seemed that he had to be face to face with a snake to do it. "But I'm in Gryffindor," Harry thought. "The Sorting Hat wouldn't have put me in here if I had Slytherin blood." "Ah," said a nasty little voice in his brain, "but the Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin, don't you remember?" Harry turned over. He'd see Justin next day in herbology, and he'd explain that he'd been calling the snake off, not egging it on, which, he thought angrily, pummeling his pillow, any fool should have realized. By next morning, however, the snow that had begun the night before had turned into a blizzard, so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was cancelled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation that she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used their lesson off to play a game of wizarding chess. "For heaven's sakes, Harry," said Hermione, exasperated, as one of Ron's bishops wrestled her knight off his horse and dragged him off the board. "Go and find Justin if it's that important to you." So Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it was usually, than it usually was in daytime because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting at someone who, by the sounds of it, had turned his friend into a badger. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free lesson to catch up on some work, and decided to check the library. First, a group of Hufflepuffs who should have been in herbology were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long lines of high bookshelves, Harry could see their heads were close together and that they were having what looked like an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking towards them when something of what they were saying met his ears, and he paused to listen, hidden in the invisibility section. So anyway, a stout boy was saying, I told Justin to hide up in a dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as his next victim, it's best that if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen, ever since he let it slip to Potter that he was Muggleborn. Justin actually told him that he was down for Eton. That's not the kind of thing that you bandy about with Slytherin's air on the loose, is it? You definitely think it is Potter then, Ernie, said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. Hannah, said the stout boy solemnly. He's a Parselmouth. Anyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue. There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on. Remember what was written on the wall, enemies of the air, beware. Potter had some sort of run-in with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cat's attacked. The first year, Creevy was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Next thing we know, Creevy's been attacked. He always seems so nice, though, said Hannah, uncertainly. And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he? Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously. The Hufflepuffs bent closer, and Harry edged nearer, nearer so that he could catch Ernie's words. No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that. He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper, and said, That's probably why you-know-who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding. Harry couldn't take any more. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and the colour was draining out of Ernie's face. Hello, said Harry. I'm looking for Justin Fletchley. The Hufflepuffs' worst fears had clearly been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. What do you want with him? Said Ernie in a quivering voice. I wanted to tell him what really happened with that snake at the dueling club, said Harry. Ernie bit his white lips and then, taking a deep breath, said, We were all there. We saw what happened. Then you noticed that, after I spoke to it, the snake backed off, said Harry. What? All I saw, said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, was you speaking Parseltongue and chasing the snake towards Justin. I didn't chase it at him, Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. It didn't even touch him. It was a very near miss, said Ernie. And in case you're getting ideas, he added hastily, I might tell you that you can trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone's, so I don't care what sort of blood you've got, said Harry fiercely. Why would I want to attack Muggleborns? I've heard that you hate those muggles that you live with, said Ernie swiftly. It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them, said Harry. I'd like to see you try it. He turned on his heels and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spellbook. Harry blundered up the corridor, barely noticing where he was going. He was in such a fury. The result was that he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backwards onto the floor. Oh, hello, Hagrid, said Harry, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, but it couldn't possibly be anyone else, as he filled most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive gloved hands. All right, Harry, he said, pulling up the balaclava so that he could speak. Why aren't you in class? Cancelled, said Harry, getting up. What are you doing here? Hagrid held up the limp rooster. Second one killed this term, he explained. It's either foxes or blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around the hen coop.